What's going on, guys? Just want to hop up here and finish reading this article. This was from my last stream, the La Mulata part one. I did read two articles, or one and a half rather. I read half of this one and I kind of left you guys out there dry. This is late at night and I was like, you guys can read the rest. But I think that's kind of unprofessional of me to do that. You know, I think if I start something, I should finish it. So that's what I'm here to do as well. And it's kind of fitting because I can kind of, make two streams out of it. And yeah, but the last stream, I basically read one and a half articles. The first one is kind of short, and this one is a little more lengthy. So I'm going to get it right into it right now. Not going to waste any time. So, and I guess I'll go back up and just let you guys see disclaimer. This is Tamara Knies. It's La Mulata, Cuba's national symbol. And this article was wrote literally 20 years ago, November 30th, 2005. So it's quite some time ago. And it's reflecting the kind of social aspects and reality of mulatto women in Cuba. And this was a case or notes studied from this quote unquote journalist here. Although I couldn't really find any other pertinent information on her as far as like her resume or background in regards to what other articles she wrote and then her like education, where she was educated, because I could definitely tell you a lot based off the tone of the article. But I tried looking, but I couldn't really find. But actually, somebody posted a comment on my other video on the first stream. Shout out to that person. I'm going to read it right now. I don't have it up on the screen, but I'll just read it for you guys. It's from G-Man. He says, it appears the author of the Cuban article you read is heavily informed by critical race theory with a dose of feminism. It says, my understanding of Cuba racial dynamics is that during their slavery period, mulattoes were generally free. Also, manumissions from slavery was easier, as was the case throughout Latin America. Then in the United States, probably due to the fact that the slave trade lasted longer. Consequently, there's been way more above the board miscegenation in that society, he's talking about Cuba, than the United States, and for a longer period of time. That process is ongoing, irrespective of how we racially label the people in that country. Yeah, and I do agree that the mixing in Cuba, and just all throughout the Caribbean, Latin America, it's been going on a long time, still going on. It's kind of been the national identity in many cases of a lot of these countries. Mexico, even though that's a different mixture, not so much mulatto, but mestizo. But yeah, for Cuba and Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Colombia, etc. Right? You have it in the northern country in South America, Suriname. They're a very, very mixed people, but they're a unique blend of like African and like Anglo-Dutch and like some native populations. So it's very interesting. But today, right now, we'll be talking about Cuba and Mulata specifically. So let me go to where I left off right here. Cool. If that is the case, why do so many white men allow themselves to believe the depictions of cigarette and sugar packages? Because what I basically came to found out reading this article last time is that they actually have the image of mulattas on sugar packages and cigarettes and other products, which is very interesting. And we know they have coffee companies named after mulatto, and they have beer companies. A gentleman shared with me that in the comments. I think it was Colombian beer, if I'm not mistaken, which is interesting. So they use our image to sell products globally. And then here, continuing on, the construction of the mulatto woman as a sexually perverse creature dehumanized her in much of the same way that depictions of blacks allowed whites to justify slavery and racial inequality. Sexuality was seen as a base and animal-like. If black and mulatto women were sexualized, then they were also likened to animals. Now, the distinction here is critically important. I always like to point this out to my audience whenever you read these articles or news stories, publications, etc., and even just social media commentary. Look how they specify black and mulatto women. They're two different, distinct groups. This is key. They're letting you know because people often say, well, they'll lie to mulattoes and say, well, the world gonna see you as black, which is a BS lie. I've traveled, been to Africa, Europe, South America, the Caribbean, Central America, North America, Canada, US. People don't see me as black. There are rare cases when you're in majority like white areas, specifically in the United States, you'll find occasional racist, okay? But those are the rare cases. Most of my experience around the world I travel, I have a level of ambiguity people don't know. Some people have thought I was Mexican, some people thought I was like Puerto Rican. So you look at like I said right here, black and mulatto. If mulatto women were just black, they would just simply just label them as black. But no, they specify the difference. You always got to point that out when these other people write these articles and make comments like, ah, see, the difference is there. Don't let people lie to you and gaslight you and say we're the same. We're not. This excused the rape of black women on plantations and the unfair treatment of dark mistresses by white males. Also, white women were not available as objects of desire. Okay, to speak of black women's sexuality here is somewhat redundant, since the body of the dark complexioned woman appears to be the only available site of female sexuality in 19th century Cuban literature. White women, that is, those of known quote unquote purity of blood and hence of social standing, were almost by definition exempt from such sexualization. If white men needed an outlet for their sexual desires, then demeaning mulatto women served this purpose. White women were considered to be cold, uninviting, and asexual. Black women were too obviously linked to slavery, were made for work, not for sex. Now, there's a common saying, and I believe it did originate in Latin America. I don't know exactly which country, but when I was in Brazil with Beatrice, she referenced this common saying that they have in that like based off like plantation kind of lore, if I can say, or edicts, whatever. Um, she was telling me, Beatrice, that, and I've heard it before from another source where it's like they say that white women are for marrying, black women are for work, and then mulattas are for sex. So that was like a common trope, I guess I can say, within the plantation kind of slavery colonial realm. Okay, as far as these partnerships go. I don't know where that saying originated. You guys could, in the comments, could probably help me out with that. Appreciate that. So the black woman was the mother of the mulata, but she was dehumanized within the framework of slavery to the point where even her sexual allure was gone. She was seen as a breeding mar and as a worker. The mulatta woman, however, as a product of the sexuality of a black woman and white man, had a lower social status than white women and could therefore be objectified. She was seen as exotic, being neither black nor white. There you go. She's mulatta. She's a unique blend combination that creates an entirely different being entity, neither black nor white, a fusion of the two, which is mulatta. Very simple concept to understand, but there's people who are not us who want to make it more difficult than it needs to be, which is okay. I'm here to help educate you guys and make content, grow an audience, and build friendships in the process. The mulatto represents Cuba being tainted with primitive African blood. Those are very interesting words. Their words, not mine, just so we're clear. The choice to make her into a sexual and social deviant comes from the conflict of a mulatta's appearance and legal social status. The mulatta looked white, but she was not truly white. The difference between being quote unquote held to white and being quote unquote truly white was not one of physical color. In 19th century Cuba, physical appearance had become equally misleading with regard to a person's racial origin. Only too often, only too often, it was difficult, if not impossible, to detect any actual physical difference between a person of Spanish and one of partial African origin. Only too often it was difficult if not impossible, to detect any actual physical difference person of Spanish and actual African origin. Martinez, 1989. Interesting. That's that whole passing phenomena you hear people talk about. There are different levels of whiteness in the facial features, exactly, symmetry and color of the mulatto, exactly, precisely. Yeah, Sarah Gather, I'll just name her. She's Duke University professor, researcher there. She's wrote some articles about mixed race kind of identity, etc. I follow her on IG. I think she followed me back. We were not like collaborators or anything, just kind of guess mutual, you could say, social media. And I would use the term loosely, but in this context with her, she's a good example. Sarah Gather, I would say she is a white passing mulatto for all intents and purposes. Skin tone, facial symmetry, bone structure, her hair texture just looks like a Caucasian woman. She has an African American father. Because in her brother, Sarah Gather, her brother looks like a quintessential mulatto, but Sarah Gather doesn't. So its genetics are can be kind of a toss up at times, can be interesting. Just wanted to note that. Okay, and then who has right here a light skinned mulatta is called an evolved mulatto, and she has mostly Caucasian features. A very white mulatto is a mulatto who can actually pass for white. It's more in 1997. In instituting the importance of legal color, it was easier for white men to sexually exploit mulattas, even if they were also using her body as a national symbol in poetry, short stories, and cigarette lithograms. Because she fit into neither racial category completely, she was dangerous. She was not for marriage, like white women were, and could not be depicted as a happy, motherly slave like black women could be. Where was her place? The mulatta then, quote, is a symbolic for all the tricky questions about how race, gender, and sexuality inflict the power relations that obtain in colonial and post-colonial Cuba, end quote. Kutzinski, 1993. She is a representation of Cuba's internal and external power structures, a physical example of outside imperial influence and a racial, economic, and gender hierarchies within Cuba. Very kind of intersectional feminism tonality, right? In that text. It's just oozing out of it, right? But the writer does make interesting points, which I can understand. So, U.S. Tourism Part 1. In 1898, the Spanish American War ended, transferring Cuba's sovereignty to the United States from Spain. Instead of transferring power to Cuba itself, Cuba, says Microsoft and Carta Online Encyclopedia, Cuba had fought for its independence from an imperial power, but instead traded one oppressor for another. Interesting. The United States swiftly took control of much of Cuba's economy, including its sugar industry, which, under United States control, remained the island's largest export. That's basically most of the kind of like Caribbean, right, at that time. Maybe because of the climate, the grow sugar. Once the United States and Cuba were linked almost as much as Spain and Cuba had been in the last century. Cuba became a major tourist destination for North Americans. A tourist postcard claimed that Cuba was, quote, so near and yet so foreign, end quote. It had exotic people and music, a tropical climate, and was a place where Americans can engage in otherwise forbidden behaviors. I believe there was a period, I think it was the Batista, during that period before Castro, they had a huge tourism market in Cuba, and they had a lot of casinos. They had a thriving casino business. From what I've seen, like as far as the history in Cuba, Americans would go there, wealthy Americans, obviously, um, would go there to travel, to engage in sex tourism, go to casinos, go to the beach, nightlife type of stuff. And relatively close if you're thinking like a flight from Florida or anywhere in that region. Okay. Yeah, where'd I leave off at? Okay. Later, after America had established Cuba as its favorite vacation spot, many aspects of American life infiltrated Cuban Cuban culture. American businesses and chains moved to Cuba in the hopes of cashing in on the Cuban tourist experience. The name of streets, restaurants, the clothing, the infrastructure became familiarly American to suit the tourist. Cuba was both familiar and exotic. It was mainly its dark complexioned people that made Cuba so interesting for white tourists. In the United States at this time, blacks and whites were segregated in restaurants, restrooms, buses, and all public spaces. The United States was empathetically racist, and it was forbidden for blacks and whites to marry. In traveling to Cuba, white American men and women were able to interact with darker men and women. American men, especially, were interested in Cuba's darker female population. The mulatto was exotic and foreign. She was not white, was not black, and sometimes her ancestry was a mystery, making her intriguing to tourists, right? That ambiguity, the exotification. The key thing I'm highlighting here, the text, is because, again, I want to stress emphasis. So, mulatto, she's not white, she's not black, right? She's mulatto. Very simple concept I will have to continue to drill in people's brains, literally. Like Cuba, she contained both the foreign and the familiar. Cuba, like the mulatto, was described in excuse me, I'm tripping. I apologize, guys. I'm trying to read this like super fast. I'm like skipping over words. Was described in explicitly sexual terms. Bruce Belivin said of Cuba, it is hot, it is wet, it is in its easy tropical way. Its statement contains some very obvious sexual imagery, and in calling it hot, wet, easy, he is implying that it is femininely sexual and also available. This imagery directly links to images of the mulatta woman as being sexually available for tourist men. Now, obviously, you can tell, guys, with the coding of the word here, right? That's what I see on social media. They take out the X, they put the G. Yeah, they put the G, so that's what you're hearing from me. Cuba was the site of sex with women of the other, exotic and mysterious, primitive and carnal, passionate and governed by libidinal. Never heard of this word before. Libidinal impulses, and often articulated in explicitly racial terms. Cuba was a romance tourism destination, but it was not white Cuba or purely black women who were sought after as much as mulatto women, who had come to be the international symbol of Cuba. Because of the mulatta, Cuba became an international sex symbol, as well as a powerful tourist draw. And it's interesting because, yeah, like they're talking about the nightlife and these wealthier kind of white North Americans or even, I guess, other Europeans who traveled to that island, specifically in America, because they said where there wasn't a larger population of mulattoes. Mulattoes have always been in America, but there we were not as, I guess, recognizable in public spaces as in a society like Cuba, where, like I said, there was no, from my understanding, anti-miscegenation laws. Like they didn't have that in Brazil. That's not a part of their history. We're talking about Cuba now, we're staying focused. But in America, we know that's been a big part of the history is the anti-miscegenation, right? To protect white purity. Remember, who are the people who come over to America? Where they called Puritans, right? They're Christian, they're Puritans. They're a good, holy, honest, hardworking people, right? That's what his story tells you, right? Cuba was a place of white men's fantasies, and this is reflected in foreigners. Discussions of Cuban beauty. The racial diversity and economic inequalities in Cuba made it possible for white tourists to exploit women of color. Interesting. I'm going to repeat, yeah, like what I just spoke of earlier. The racial diversity and the economic inequalities makes it so it's more, you know, it's easier for them. They don't have to really, yeah. Possible for white tourists to exploit women of color. Yeah, interesting. Waldo Frank says a woman passes the hips and the high heels are jazz. The arms and breasts swathe her in adulation. Andalusian softness. Under the blare of her rogue, African mumbled. Perez, 1999. The woman is nameless, an object. He dissects her body as if talking about an animal. Her hips, arms, breasts reflect her sensuality, and the harsh blare of her rogue gaze gives away her African heritage. Okay, the breast reflects her sensuality and the harsh blare. Okay. Pinning her as a mulatto Jezebel. Okay. This is interesting history. I'm kind of fascinated by this because I'll just make a statement here. Like I see today, like with this correlation, we look at like with the azodification, I guess I could say, but like even with like OnlyFans, and these like websites and the amount of mulattoes who are engaged in that work, it's very interesting because a lot of people at the same time say, well, we're not really a big population. There's not that many of us. Well, a lot of mulattoes identify as black. That's the thing. So your numbers, you don't really know your numbers because you're just giving your numbers up to another population so they can get more political representation, right? But it's interesting, like in like the adult work, like there's a lot of mulattoes who do that work in the United States, Um, so it's interesting looking at this correlation. They're talking about the tourism here in Cuba, and they're referencing a time period, prior to Castro's kind of emergence. So we say like 100 years ago, or even before then. Well, yeah, because yeah, American tourism. It's quite interesting. Okay. The diversity present in this woman reflects Cuba's own racial diversity, and her African blood makes her into an object of lust. In a Cuban travel art guide, the women are described, their complexions are like petals of some unknown flower between pink and brown. Their figures as dainty as a midsummer night's dream. The aspect of the unknown makes these women appealing. They are dainty and flower like, not a threat to powerful American imperialist males. Because those would be the tourist types, right? The guys who had money, like especially during that time, who would go to Cuba. Those are the guys who had money. And so yeah. Now those same type of guys, a lot of them now they're going to Thailand now. That's their kind of choice now, Thailand. But yeah, like 100 years ago, they'd be going to Cuba. Shorter flight as well, right? Cuba became America's playground, with mulattas serving as American men's playthings. Okay. U.S. tourism part two: the evolution and the special period. Appreciate you guys in the chat, the viewers. I don't expect a huge turnout. I didn't like broadcast that I was gonna go live. I was actually gonna do this a couple days ago, but I decided to just do this now. Shout out to Iberian Mulatto. That's how the Cape Verde is seeing white people like going over there. Interesting. Yeah. A writer Albert put the number I heard is 3.1 million mulattoes in the United States. Last I heard. Interesting. Do you have a source? Is that like a government source or some other independent study? There's a lot of people to count. Just gonna get a drink real quick. For me, it'd be interesting to see exactly how they can kind of, because the census is kind of the most official, accurate, because they mail you a form to fill out. Not everyone fills it out, obviously, but it's kind of your duty, your civic duty. You want representation. Yeah, let me continue on, guys. Want to get through this and keep it pushing. U.S. tourism part two: the revolution and the special period. This concept has not left international images of Cuba even today. And the internal racial discrimination existed throughout the revolution and during the special period. While slavery produces discriminatory practices, the absence of such practices does not necessarily imply the absence of prejudice. Yeah, definitely agree. Moreover, the persistence of some racial consciousness in Cuba uh, not only after abo- abolition of slavery, but even after the 1959 revolution, when its egalitarian doctrine throws doubt on such an interpretation. In other words, even after the abolishment of slavery and the colorblind efforts of Fidel Castro, racial equality has not been achieved in Cuba. Castro's attempted to make Cuba colorblind by ending the usage of racial terminology. Technically, well, that's because it's communism. Let's be real. Like they do that across the board with like religion, and they want to make everyone kind of the same, kind of government entity, kind of right. I mean, I talked to a Cuban guy a long time ago. I remember when I was like 18. He's from Cuba, and he was telling me, "Oh yeah, when Castro came to power, he made it illegal, like the racial discrimination, which is applaudable, right? Um, and a lot of the African American revolutionaries drew inspiration from Fidel Castro, which is interesting. Like guys like Huey P. Newton and George Jackson and some of these other people, they kind of look. Even that woman who just passed away, Asada Shakur, I think her name was, or something. She was African American, like activist, and she fled, I believe, exiled or something in Cuba. So that's kind of been a thing. Um, there's a history there. We can explore that aspect in the future, but I want to stay focused here. Um, Technically, there was no definition of race. Castro attempted to get female sex workers other jobs because so many sex workers were mulattas. This benefited women of color. Yeah, I saw a video. It was a white American guy. He's like my age. He was a younger guy. He's a travel vlogger. Um, and he was recently in Cuba, I think like a few months ago. And he was basically giving a general observation. He didn't make any points on like the race aspect. He was just talking about the nationality of the women in Cuba. He was talking about during this period where a lot of the women, um, they were making more money doing this type of work than if they were to get like a education and get a job working as like an engineer or something, or a healthcare specialist, because in their economy, their wages are not really good. Even if they were like doctors or like high level professionals, like in the United States, you get a lot of money. If you're like a doctor or high level professional, but in some, like in that time in Cuba, based off their economy, like their salaries were not even good, even if they had all this education, which is crazy. So like some of these women, even though they had those jobs, they would go to the tourist area and hook up with the tourists, and they'd make more money doing that than their actual like 9 to 5 like medical job, which is insane and crazy to think about. But then again, that's kind of the issue with the economy and like the government, how they're the resources, right? They're utilizing resources. Because in America, like the women who engage like in that type of work, a lot of them, they're just kind of lazy, right? They just give an easy, quick buck. They don't, let's be real. I mean, I'll get pushback for saying that, but it's just because easy, quick buck. You can make way more money, have a longevity doing something else, but everyone's personal decision, personal choice. That's on them. Okay, and then he put here, because so many sex workers were mulattoes. Yeah, okay. In ignoring the complex issues of race and sexuality, however, he also made racial tensions understated, but all the more present. If a problem cannot be addressed, it will be left to fester. This festering problem especially came to light during a special period, or the period of economic crisis in Cuba, caused by the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that's, yeah, the special period. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, I mean, funny, yeah, quote unquote collapsed. I mean, they're still a global power, right? It's just under a different name. Its biggest backer, right? The problems of race and sexuality, however, had not disappeared even before the new economic crisis. Martinez Alero wrote about the lingering inequalities long before the special period when racial, economic, and gender inequalities increased. Because mulatto and black women do not have access to American or European money, since it was mostly upper class whites who left Cuba during the revolution. Many women sell their bodies in order to get dollars. Mulattoes and black Cubans are once again relegated to their historical trajectory of promiscuity and I don't know, this word's a new word, licentian, licentious. I gotta look this up because I can't pass these words by. It's the licentiousness, the state of quality of being sexual, unrestrained, and lacking moral or legal discipline. But then again, of course, they're gonna use these words that you don't see often. This is a scholarly article. They're actually citing their sources and stuff here, which is good. And yeah, okay. Uh, yeah. Once again, mulattoes are being used as sexual objects by white men. That was in Cabaza's 1998. As Cuba's economic situation worsened, so did the status of the mulatto female. It is not just foreign white men who degrade mulattas, but the internal members of Cuban society who view mulatto women as inherently sexual beings. Because interracial couples are still uncommon in Cuba, mulatto and black women are the most obvious genitales. That's this word right here. That's a Spanish word for like a prostitute, if I'm not mistaken. I've heard that before in Cuba. Yeah, female prostitute. So it's a Cuban slang. In that J, it's a H in Espanol, right? Geniterias. Geniterias. Yeah. They're therefore the ones who are most often caught by the authorities. Yeah. They're engaged in that work and then prostitution's illegal. So they can get thrown in jail, go to prison. It's severely criminalized there. But it's crazy, yeah, because the economic situation, a lot of these women, they take the risk because they need the money. It's crazy. There's a lot of videos on YouTube you can find about that actually. You do I'm not gonna share them here on this channel with this discussion. I just want to share the article, but I'm just giving you guys reference. You can go on YouTube on this app right here and look at some videos in Cuba, like tourism in Cuba and that, or even type that in the Genitalias and it'll pop up. There's a lot of like references to that and how it's interrelated to the economy, the lack of resources and jobs, and how people will take the risk. Like I said, in the male form of the word, the term means a hustler, but it's not necessarily sexual in nature. Women hustlers, however, are associated with sex workers because those in financial trouble often turn to hustling or to sex work. It is often mulattas and women of color who fulfill this role. It's often, but it's not always the case because there's just as many, like you quote unquote, white Hispanics who are engaged in the same work, sex work. But I get what the ladies in the article stating, but that's why she's not saying all. She's saying often. It's often these mulattoes and she put women of color, yeah, black, etc., who are engaged in that work. But it's yeah, there's plenty of the white Hispanics in that society who are engaged in that. Mulattoes are so much associated with the role of sex workers that to be a sex worker is to take on the mulatto's race, regardless of genetic origin. To be a sex worker is to assume the identity of a mulatta. So ingrained is the concept of the mulatta's sexual interest to tourists. This Fusco, 1998. Many mulatto women who are seen with white men, tourists of Cuba, are at least subconsciously assumed by other Cubans to be mistresses or possible jineterias. Just by being seen with a white guy, they're like, oh, they're a tourist, like a gringo, right? American, whatever. They're like, oh, they already know what you guys are doing. Those are just the assumptions in their society. What I'm saying, I would just think they're a couple. Wherever I travel, I see people, but they have different perceptions. Images of the mulatto in Brazil and in Cuban American consciousness. The image of the alluring mulatto has reappeared in American markets. On American website, I found images of current perceptions of Cuban beauty. There are illustrations of a scantily clad Cuban mulata on various items of clothing and other collectibles, including thongs. That's nice. I'd like to see that. Boxers, t-shirts, mugs, coasters, all stamped with the phrase "Made in America." And remember, I told you guys I was at that Cuban restaurant in Miami called La Mulata. So yeah, in America, they even have this kind of Cuban inspired kind of Mulata branding for the restaurant, which is interesting. So we know is a real thing. We have like I have firsthand knowledge. We're showing you evidence and proof. I just want to find some of these other products, like they talked about the sugar packages in Cuba or cigars. That's very interesting. They got our image everywhere to sell products. But are we profiting from it? Do we make any money? Of course not. It's the imperialists, the racial imperialists. They're using our image and making money off of us. We got to change that. We got to make sure we get some of those dollars. Okay. This is an example of America's remaining fascination with Cuba, and especially with its mulatto women. The creator of the line, however, is Cuban American living in Miami, Cafe Press. Now, American manufacturers are making profit by using the icon of the mulatto's sensual body as a selling point to Cuban Americans who long for home and to Americans in general. The images are degrading and overtly sexual, as the woman depicted has extravagantly large breasts and hips with large eyes gazing directly at the buyer of the item, just as the mulatto on cigarette lithographs started seductively. Excuse me, yes, think she put stared seductively, but then maybe that's her own typo there. Stared seductively at white male consumers in the 19th century. Cuban males, regardless of race, were able to use the image of the subjugated mulatto female as a form of propaganda and as a marketing tool. Use the image of the subjugated mulatto female as a form of propaganda and a marketing tool. Yeah. Making money off of our image and name. Not that many people talk about it. What other mulattoes are talking about this? Okay. The fact that these items even exist shows that America's perceptions of Cuba and the Mulata have not changed, and that the Mulata is still representative of Cuba's exploitation by foreign powers, but it also seen as a source of Cuban American pride, as a reminder of their homeland. In Cuba, the Mulata is a symbol of male domination regardless of race. The objectification of the mulatto is not unique to Cuba, because the phenomena of white males and black females procreating is not uniquely Cuban. It appears in many places in Latin America, in the Caribbean, and in Africa, West Africa. That's where it all started, right? And the image of the mulatto manifests itself in countries other than Cuba as a national symbol. Brazil is similar in its treatment of the mulatto. Yeah, and Beatrice told me, we were talking in Rio de Janeiro, that they actually had courses and classes that women could take in Brazil on how to be a mulata. That they literally had these kind of like mulata etiquette classes to teach them the mannerisms, how to dress. That's interesting, as I never even heard about that until Beatrice brought that to my attention. It's like, wow, that's actually a real thing. Okay, and they're making a correlation here, like we're saying, with Brazil and Cuba, and making the correlation, the link in regards to Mulata, the image of Mulata. Mulata subjectively in Brazil is in ensconcated. Some of these words are brand new to me. I know I have Al in the chat. He's a writer journalist, so I know he's going to be more familiar. His lexicons, he's older than me. I'm pretty sure is more well read. It's a larger lexicon than me, but I'm like, yeah. Where the hell did I just? Right here, yeah. Ensconcated. Okay, this is my sloppy live streaming because I'm gonna have to go. I'm looking up the word ensconced. Ensconced. Established or settled someone in a comfortable, safe, or secret place. Ensconced. Yeah, this is the first time I've ever seen this word. But interesting word choice from this writer here. Definitely making me learn some new words. Mulatto subjectivity in Brazil is ensconced in the history of con- conjugal union. In situations of patriarchal domination, the male usually being the dominant class and race, and the female from a subaltern group, and her body encoded as such. And that source is Gillum and Gillum, 1999. I wonder what the book is. Gillum and Gillum books. What book is that? 1999. Edited. So that's the book. Okay. All right, back to business. White males are given a higher position than women in a patriarchal society, and black women are automatically given an even lower status. Right, so that's intersectional feminism, right? You can already tell. Right? Angela Gillum, an anthropologist, explains how Brazil and the United States have similar constructions of black women, similar to the Brazilian case. The Mulata slash Jezebel image justifies, in Muling's words, miscegenation and sexual assault, while the Mammy May Preta image validates slave conditions of labor. Therefore, mulattas are sexually objectified when they are young and attractive and are then desexualized and blackened in old age. That's an interesting concept. Losing their mulatto status. That is very interesting. And I do see that that is a reality that maybe I've subconsciously I've seen it referenced in movies or books or whatever, but like, yeah, it says, therefore, mulattoes are sexually objectified when they are young and attractive, but they're desexualized and they're quote unquote blackened in old age. They're losing mulatto status. That's the key thing right here. The ending part of it, the status, the mulatto status. Part of the mulatta's appeal then is her youth and beauty, the ideals she represents, and her ability to be objectified as a non-white, but not completely black. Right. The mulatta's age is also a factor in Cuba. Her youth, a symbol of Cubans' virility, much in the same way the mulatta is viewed in Brazil. In lithographs from the 19th century, mulattas are always young and beautiful. But what happens to the mulatta when she loses her youth and beauty? When she can no longer be an object of desire? In one lithograph, a mulatta is portrayed in a sexually inviting manner, wearing clothing that accentuates her buttocks and breasts. She is with a darker, older woman who is standing behind her, looking serious and masculine. It is possible that the older woman was a mulatto in her youth and has become a black woman now that she is older and not an object of white men's desires. The youth and beauty of the mulatta is very literally a symbol of Cuba's virility and therefore essential to the identity of the mulatta. She was created through the preconceived sexual prowess and power of white males, making Cuban men seem sexually potent and masculine. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. I don't know what else to say. This is very interesting stuff. Again, first time reading this with you guys. And like I said, I want to present this to you live. And my first time, your first time. We're all learning together, right? That's the whole process, community building. Her desirability is also an asset to Cuba as a country, but that can only work when she's beautiful. Her body provides revenue from tourists who want to have sex with her, watch her dance, and merely have a conversation with her. She is also a temptation for tourists, a draw for them, giving Cuba some power. While her body is used by tourists, her ability to excite them is also a sign of Cuba's seductiveness. She is a symbol of subversion. At the same time, she is an icon of Cuba's exploitation. In this poem, can you pronounce it? Plena del Menialno. I know I butchered it. My Spanish is really, really bad. Okay, addresses this concept. Shake your behind, Mulata, project into eternity. That movement of your hips, like the hurricane's wind, and shake it from here to there, from here to here. Shake it to make Uncle Sam rage. I gotta look up that. So it's a poem, man. Yeah. I'm gonna go back and do my own research, revisit this article because there's so much good information here. The mulatto is sexualized in his poem, but she is also strangely empowered. She is able, yeah, to seduce the American, right? Seduce them and get money from him. She is able to make America rage with the movement of her hips, either because she drives American men into a sexual frenzy or because conservative Americans are outraged by her seductive movements. Either way, The mulatto's youth, beauty, and sensuality are important in making Cuba exciting enough to attract tourists. Money in making Cuba appear virile and beautiful. The mulatto's youth and beauty also demonstrates the masculinity of Cuban men, as white Cuban men's sexuality created the Cuban mulatta. This view of the Mulata is similar to Brazil's. In 1992, Angela Gillum traveled with her daughter to Brazil and found that the youth and sexuality of the Mulata are important to her identity as being separate from black, as well as to use as a symbol of Brazil's sexuality. One Mulata in Brazil said, "If you walk like a Mulata, everyone on the street is going to know that you are one. To dress like Mulata is to have hair like mine, the long applique hair weave. It is to put on a long skirt, high heeled shoes with platform soles. I adore walking around pretty, decorated, perfumed. This makes me feel good." This Mulata takes pride in her sexuality and plays it up, knowing that is a source of power for her, because the construction of the Mulata is similar in Brazil and Cuba. I will infer that some Cuban mulatto women also see their attractiveness to white men, foreign or otherwise, as a source of power, as well as a source of income if they choose to sell their bodies or become showgirls. Being seen as a mulatto requires the right hair straightened enough through natural or chemical means. It requires a hiding of a woman's African heritage and a concentration of her being quote unquote almost white but containing enough black blood to be sexually exciting to white tourists. Being a mulatta as a profession, it requires the proper uniform to represent Brazil's or Cuba's sexuality and require the mulatta to fit her identity to proper taste. So this reference work, definitely got to check this one out. Gillum and Gillum, 1999. Gillum and Gillum attended mulatto shows in Brazil. See, they had mulatto shows. What is that? Interesting, right? Um, in Brazil, in which they saw the draw of the mulatto's youth and beauty for foreign tourists. Most of the audience was made up of white males from countries like Argentina and Germany. The women were very light skinned, but the music and costumes were African. The women's costumes revealed their nipples. This concentration on the breast indicated that the show was designed for foreign men, as in Brazil, the hips are the symbol of sexuality. The women dancers were Brazilian, were also subjugated to the foreign men's desires and allowed themselves to be fondled on stage. While they symbolized Brazil's sensuality, they also had to cater to the desires of white foreign men, altering themselves to fit foreign conceptions of their identities. I would like to see when the show they talked about these mulatto shows in Brazil. What year was that? What period? It doesn't specify here, but I know it's probably going to be in this book here that I got to check out. But they had mulatto shows in Brazil. So much mulatto history in Brazil, around the planet as well. Like I was saying, Costa Rica, they have it there, and we know in Cuba, we're talking about right now, and of course, Dominican Republic. I'm going to talk about in an hour in Haiti. So, um, con- conclusions in Cuba, the mulatto follows this pattern. She was objectified by white men in 19th century because they were not able to objectify white women, women of their own status. The mulatta took on the role of the mistress, not because she wanted to be sexually exploited, but because of the concept of whitening. In the 20th century, the mulatta and Cuba both passed from Spanish to American hands. As the United States came to dominate Cuban industry and force Cuba to cater to American interests, the mulatta's body continued to be a symbol of illicit sexuality, removed of her dignity and her individuality. During the special period, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, race relations returned to Cuba's forefront, and gender, racial, and economic disparities came through in the existence and treatment of Black and mulatto Geneterias, sex workers, or female hustlers. As in Brazil, the mulatta must alter the presentation of her body to fit the fantasies of white male tourists. Just like Cuba, must appeal to these men in order to boost its tourist economy, or tourist industry rather. Still, the Mulata is an ambivalent symbol for a country that is seen in conflicting ways by the United States as a former neo colony and also as a threat, enticing and dangerous at the same time. The Mulata remains a national symbol and is seen as indication of Cuba's diversity, sexuality, beauty, and sway over tourists, as well as a symbol of Cuba's internal inequalities in terms of race, gender, and class. That's intersectionality, right? Just gotta throw that out there again, just let you guys know. I see it. You see it. I see it. Okay. Now that Castro has determined that the special period has ended, it will be interesting to see if the status of the Mulata changes or if she remains in her historical space. This is 20 years ago, this lady wrote this, but I'm telling you, I'm seeing right now in the United States where I can kind of see a large presence of mulattoes who are engaged in not only like the stripper culture, but like the OnlyFans kind of sex work culture, you know? So they're still and you can't blame white imperialists or tourists on what you see in the United States. They'll try to, right? That's kind of thing, the angle that people who are more so inclined with like intersectional feminism, that's what their whole kind of positioning is, though the man is evil, the man's bad, the woman's a victim, right? That's the thing. So, but like I'm saying, I look at today, it's like, well, they can't really blame the white guys, can they? Not in the United States. Um, yeah, changes remains the historical space. Yeah. They can do whatever they want. They can be doctors, teachers, nurses, dentists, artists. I follow some mulatto artists. I follow a lot of mulattoes who are into fitness. They're fitness models or fitness influencers, etc., or just normal people with families and jobs. It's their choice what they want to do. But I found this article to be interesting. I wanted to share with you guys. This is 20 years ago, like I said, because there's so much history here. Like with Cuba, I've never been to Cuba yet. I do want to go. It's on my list of the next like travel destination. But currently, with the administration we have, there was something that was passed recently, like, I think a couple months ago, when I kind of decided I want to go to Cuba, because I found like some cheap flights. I was like, it's actually very affordable. You can go there. Um, but like I said, the current administration, they signed something into effect where you can't go to Cuba for tourism. They make it difficult to where for the visa process, you have to state that you want to support like a family or support a business, or there's some kind of workaround. I'm probably making it seem like it's harder to go there than it is, but just the fact that the government's like stepping in and making special rules, it kind of like irritates me, to where I'm like, okay, let me just take a break right now and go focus on some other country. Once another administration comes in and they can kind of lift those restrictions, etc., then I think that would be the time to go. But right now, yeah, I really would like to go spend some time in Cuba, practice Spanish, and learn more of the history, talk to people. I think it'd be a really great experience. I know there's a ton of mulattoes in Cuba. Clearly, this whole article, they're talking about the national symbol, which I've known it's another mulatto nation. A lot of mulattoes in Cuba. So therefore, a lot of history we have there in the whole Caribbean. So yeah, let me get to your guys' comments and then bid you guys farewell for the evening. Jungle Thriving says, God bless you are dropping knowledge about mulatto history. Appreciate you being here. Thank you. And communism doesn't work, never will. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Shout out to you guys. I appreciate you guys being here. I'll post this article. I can post in the chat right now, just so you guys, whoever you that's watching, can click it. And I'll also post the link of the article in the description as well, so you guys have access to that. Appreciate you guys being here. Make sure to hit the like button, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. All right. So peace out.